Well, I appreciate the introduction. I didn't hear any of it. I just clicked the mute button on, and I'll start with saying technology is wonderful, works, and
Yes.
oftentimes it's the user that is the biggest problem. And I think this morning there was a bit of a problem when I didn't the name underneath my
Yes.
picture wasn't recognized, and I hadn't hit my unmute button. But we're here.
Yes. Well, thank you for joining us. I was explaining that you were the former chairman for Samco, and that you are a true you get transportation, and you've already got legislation filed for a couple different transportation issues. And I just wanted you to go ahead and give an overview of your goals for session and kind of what you think it's going to look like.
Glad to. As a matter of fact, you've been, we've been doing this over the course of the last few weeks quite a bit with different constituencies, and of course, all the problems start with the questions around how is the session going to be managed this time around. This organization, as well as all the other constituents, are going, hey guys, I'm really concerned about access and being able to reach you at the right time. We all know that as legislation starts to make its way through the arduous process, whether it's in calendars or in committee or ultimately on the floor, things can change virtually in a moment, in any moment. And oftentimes that change can be uh, helpful or detrimental to the bill itself. So open, quick dialogue between constituents and those of us that are taking the votes is incredibly important. I can tell you, I was in Austin last week, distancing and masks, but in Austin with many of my colleagues, and everybody has the same concern, yet commitment to making sure that if you will stay flexible, we will stay as accessible as possible. So I think that while a little bit of an anxiety, I think everybody recognizes it, and we're going to do everything that we possibly can to make sure that we have timely access, from our constituencies across the board. Um, some of the most important issues that are going to be, I think, facing, well, let me rephrase that. The most important issue that will be facing the Ledge is going to be COVID-19 and the management of it. I mean, it's interlaced virtually in everything we do, across the board. And, I'm sure we're going to give it the level of attention that it needs and address it correctly. The comptroller, Hager, announced a while back that we were going to be facing a 4 point, I think, $8 billion deficit, and that certainly is going to be, a fun challenge. To tongue in cheek kind of annotation there, but the reality is we'll manage it. We have had other I'm sorry, issues with budgets in past, and we've managed our way through it. The state of Texas has had a robust economy for many, many years, and we're in a position to where we just have to make sure that we set our priorities correctly and divert the expenditures to those things that are highest in our priority. Uh, you know, it's going to be important that those of us that are creating legislation recognize that for every bill that we submit, there's typically a fiscal note, right? It's going to cost some money somewhere at some point, or divert some money. So we have to be very cognizant of that. So I think that this session, there will be a new, if you will, interest in bills that suggest or create funding sources to try to supplement the $4.8 billion deficit, as well as funding any additional projects that we feel are critical to our economy. We've all pretty much accepted that education is a top priority. Infrastructure build is another high priority. Both of those are big ticket items. And I think that the legislature is committed to addressing both of those. The other one that seems to be on the table now is healthcare issues. Obviously, with the COVID, we're looking at that completely differently, and how we can leverage the dollars that we do have, or perhaps dollars that we can acquire at the federal level for all of those issues, all three: education, healthcare, as well as infrastructure and transportation. So I think we're going to be looking at those revenue sources a little differently. In the past, there's always been reluctance on trying to draw down federal dollars because of the state match. I think that's going to be reviewed, renewed interest in that. Um, there's also some bills, some revenue bills that are out there. My goodness, everybody always talks about. So we got a marijuana bill out there. Probably a couple of them will crop up. No pun intended. We also have the whole casino gambling revenues. And those are going to be, certainly have a dollar figure associated with it, but it'll also have a lot of folks that are just reluctant in doing you know revenue generation from those sources. I think that there's a couple of bills out there. Certainly, mine, House Bill 207, which we've dubbed as 2 cents for Texas, I think has a lot of merit, and I think is very easy to argue its merits, which I plan to do, and I've already started working with my colleagues to do that. There's others out there. Ken King has submitted a bill uh, that talks about registration fees for electronic cars, or battery operated or solar cars. Um, Let me talk a little bit about my bill, and then maybe we could kind of jump into a Q and A, and I'll take you whatever down. You open up the rabbit hole, and I'll go down it, and we'll see what we find, and I'll certainly give you my honest impression as it sits today, right? But as I said before, House Bill 207, we're dubbing it as 2 cents for Texas, but it does have another component on it, which is a CPI component, a Consumer Price Index component, and I think the natural argument for the CPI piece of it simply says, hey, listen, 30 years, it's been 20 cents. We've never made adjustments. And in today's environment, everyone on this call, I believe, understands, you might allocate a $1 million project today. By the time it actually turns the shovel, it's 4 or 5 years down the road. And the cost of living index has gobbled up 10, 15, 20% of the product of the project. So, I mean, we've got to be able to keep up with that, inflationary investment. And I think the CPI does it. The language in the bill basically says that we'll set the CPI, and every year it'll get adjusted upward or downward. We recognize that in the course, the estimate is that it would probably be an upward adjustment over the course of the next 5 years. So there's some revenue to be generated there, but more than anything, it's nothing more than keeping up with inflation. So the other 2 cents are the ones that I think will be the most impactful. Generally speaking, over a 5 year period, we're looking at $2.5 billion of revenue that would come into the coffers. Those revenues would be distributed as they are distributed today, which is 75% goes to transportation, highway construction, and 25% of it goes to education, which kind of hits the two big key areas of interest, I think, across the state: big ticket items, transportation, and education. So it begins to fund both of those with significant revenues. Realizing that, I know that most people will say, well, that's an awful lot of money. And when you look at it from a construction perspective, from a highway construction perspective, it's not as much money as it would be a lot of money in my account, your account, or somebody else's. But the reality of it is, in the construction highway account, it isn't that much. It's a few additional projects over the course of time. But I think at the end of the day, it's a revenue source that would become reliable. And as we start to taper off the issues you know, uh, the migration to electric cars, for example, I mean, that's going to be 5, 10, 15 years out before the acceptance is there and the market penetration is there. I think folks like that are with Tesla will tell you, I mean, they're not expecting an immediate surge of a lot of electric cars on the road. So by the time we are able to, have a electric car market that's significant enough to be able to generate the kinds of dollars that are needed, I think for now, I think this is a great approach. It could be, and I think others will make an argument that it is diminishing, but it won't disappear. It will always be. I mean, Texas will, the U.S. For all intentional purposes, will always have, well, for my lifetime, and many of us on the call will have fossil fuel type power generation, or generation for vehicle mobility. So those are the rationales that we kind of put behind the bill. We did have a discussion early on. Mihaela Plaza, who's my Lege director, and I kind of researched it. We try to find as many bills or potential languages that had been suggested, and of course, there's been a lot of discussion and angles, but we felt that keeping it simple would be the best approach. We talked about electronic cards or some sort of a fee associated with that. Again, if there's an appetite across the board in the legislature to do that, I guess it'll happen. But when you look at the total scheme of things, even Representative King's bill generates, I think it's $200 per vehicle. There's just not enough vehicles. $30 million is what's projected in 2024 revenue generation, and unfortunately, $30 million is a part of a project, right? I mean, that's just not enough money to really make a significant difference. I think over time, in a decade or two, the volume will be there that becomes a reasonable argument to start to make. But for now, I think we're putting forth in House Bill 207 probably the most practical, and effective bill going forward. I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to be successful. I did introduce it last time. I did get it out of calendar. I did get it into Ways and Means, but unfortunately didn't get much further. But things have changed so much, and I'm looking forward to a great session. But with that, Andrea, I'll turn it back over to you, and I'd be glad to answer any questions on the bill, on other bills, on whatever you think is of interest to your membership.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for that overview and for describing your bill at length. And for those that are on the call afterwards, I will send around, your staff sent me the great kind of rundown and summary of the bill, and as well as the press release that went with it. And it really does outline a lot of the major points that you just covered really well. So I think that's the hardest piece about a lot of this legislation is, one, you have to have an understanding of transportation funding to begin with. And then you have to think about indexing versus increasing. And a lot of times those words get intertwined and everything gets lost in the details. So your summary was excellent. So I'm going to go ahead and after the call, I'll share that with everybody. Right. I do want to start with this bill, just because you were just talking about it. You had said it was about 2.5 billion over, I think you said 3 to 5 years.
5 years.
5 years. Okay. And then 75% of that would go to kind of the highway fund, traditional way of the gas taxes funding, and then 25% would be for education. Correct. Okay. And then, so my thought with that and my question is, in each of these conversations where we've spoken to an array, right? D's, R's, transportation experts, kind of transportation committee members, none of the above, right? And everybody's kind of all over the board on this, right? So some people say, yes, gas tax is still very much, we need to look at it. Some say, no, we have to look at a complete overhaul because it's a dinosaur way of funding transportation. And then others are hesitant for the electric vehicle conversation because of what you mentioned, where, well, there's not that much on the road right now.
Right.
And so I hear you say Texans will always have, especially Texas, right, to try to compare us to other states in the nation. Texas will probably for a lot longer have more of a reliance on traditionally fueled vehicles, right? And it's interesting because I think that the same people that could probably agree on that are not necessarily the same people that would agree that anything needs to be done to the gas tax, right? So I think that's a bit of a quandary that we find ourselves in, because there's this movement to want to say, okay, we need to look at how we're collecting the funds for technology and innovation, but yet there's an unwillingness to let go of that traditionally fueled concept. So how are you kind of having these conversations with your colleagues across both aisles to get some kind of consensus?
Well, I mean, those discussions are we're clearly having them. Most of the conversations start with a philosophical perspective of, listen, we in a time when the economy is struggling, the last thing we need to do is be talking about a tax. And of course, who can argue with that, right? Easy to say, but then there's the second part of that argument that says, depending on how you structure the tax and where it's going to be spent, there probably are some taxes, levies, some fees that would be more acceptable than others. Quite honestly, we seldom get beyond the philosophical, especially when I talk to my friends across the aisle. That I tell them, look, if you go back to your community and you say, listen, we've got to generate revenue. There's no question about that. We've got to find new revenue sources, and we're going to start with the smart, less least painless, and that's one. Let's try to get our federal dollars distributed to Texas in a more fair distribution model. Right now, we're a donor state. We should be getting at least getting our money back, if not some sort of an index that says, based on the growth of traffic that we're getting in Texas, we should be getting more money. Many people from Florida, California, and other states are coming to Texas. You see that in the number of miles driven and the cars on the road, and we should be able to manage that at the federal level and draw down more dollars there. The other one is here in the state of Texas. How are we going to generate an amount of revenue that people feel is a fair thing? And we get into the philosophical discussion of the other revenue bills that are out there: marijuana, gambling, and everybody kind of goes like, well, no doubt my constituency would much prefer a fuel tax, a user fee, per se, than the other taxes. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to have to make a difficult decision to create more revenue for our state. And while I think that, again, the number certainly sounds large, $2.5 billion over 5 years. When you look at it in total perspective, we've done the numbers. The impact to individuals is relatively insignificant, because I mean it is 2 cents per gallon. You can do them. You even go work backwards and work the math. Is not a significant impact. I've had arguments or debates, comments made by some of my friends that they say, hey, listen, a user fee is regressive in nature. You're hurting those at the very bottom of the spectrum. And I can tell you, I just finished working as the co-chair for the transportation initiative here in San Antonio. And the vast majority of the individuals at that end of the spectrum do use public transit. And I think as long as we keep public transit in the mix and continue to invest in its accessibility, I mean, we'll be able to say, listen, but we're offering an alternative. Granted, if you can't afford the fuel, adding 2 cents to it's only going to make it even less affordable. But there's an alternative for you to get to work, to school, or to for play, so to speak, and that's using public transit. So I think that there's not a perfect solution. Recognizing that we've got to generate significant revenue to put into our industry. By the way, and I don't have to. I won't preach to the choir, but I mean the industry generates so many jobs and so much of an investment that there are many paybacks to that investment, and not to mention just the congestion and the saving of time in getting from one place to another. Across the board, there's many arguments that can be made, but I think the first thing and I just go back to what your question was, what are my colleagues telling me? I think right now the philosophical one is coming to grips with the fact that there's going to have to be a willingness on all of our parts to identify revenue sources, and then which one of those revenue sources are the most palatable. And I think we haven't gotten much further beyond that, but I certainly hope to have those discussions with all of my colleagues, because it's important that we all kind of whether we agree with it or not, as long as we understand what we're trying to get accomplished, I think it's a most important thing. And I can tell you, your organization is going to be instrumental in helping get that message out.
Right. And your comment about the return on investment, I appreciate you. That's kind of the next thing I was going to talk about, because in all of these sessions, we usually start with that, right? We explain that what makes this investment unique is that there's proven return on the dollar, right? So I think it's anywhere from $3 to $6 on the dollar economic development. And then for every billion invested in transportation, it's about 13,000 jobs, right? Indirect or direct, that are, either generated or saved, right? For that matter. And when we're looking at recovering, it's even more important to have this conversation. So that 2.5 billion over the next 5 years, is the baseline, right? That's your baseline that you're
Right.
generating. It doesn't even count. It doesn't even consider all the extra returns on the investment. So when you're looking at other, whether it's the marijuana or it's I can't imagine those numbers stimulate anything close to that, as
Right.
as it does for transportation. So, I want to switch to, we've got a question, talking a little bit about the local versus state control conversations, which are always dicey. And Barry Goodman with the Goodman Corporation wants to know, are you supportive of a local options bill where, subject to vote, vehicle registration fees can be increased on a county by county basis to support mobility improvements? This would enable local choice to increase taxes to help leverage other transportation funding. And I know there's some counties that do have this already,
Yep.
but
Bear County was one of them.
right, yeah. So tell me, can you kind of from your lens then talk
Sure.
about, kind of how that worked for you all?
Yeah, the simple answer is yes, I do support it. I supported the referendum a few years ago when we did deploy the $10 registration fee here in Bear County. We had a very intense, close call. I say close call, and that we tried, but it just didn't work out. To try to do that again last legislative session, there were some folks who were willing to support it here for Bear County for another $10, which would have hit our max. But the trade-off was a little bit too much, so we figured, live to fight another day. Representative Ina Mijares submitted that bill, and I was a co-author of the bill last time. And while I have not taken the initiative to refile that bill, I do believe that there are some folks, including Ina, that are considering doing it. I've kind of got my hands full with my own, but I would be very supportive and be a joint author on any of those initiatives. So the simple answer is yes, I am supportive, and I have been supportive in the past.
And can you share a little bit about what that experience, so in assessing that $10, what has that helped for the county? How has that helped improve
Right.
mobility?
Well, I mean,
How it's been utilized?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the most important part of it is it has supported the Alamo RMA, the Regional Mobility Authority, giving them the level of revenue stream. One, just to keep them functional. The RMA had really had created and never really fully utilized or even partially utilized. So it's allowed the RMA to be able to, to kickstart a lot of the projects that they had on their project list. And the hope was that with an additional $10 in the last session would have even jump started them even more. As chairman of the MPO here in San Antonio, when I was there for my term on council, we were always looking for those revenue sources and making sure that that we used the list, if you will, for Bear County, that the RMA was had sitting in the wings ready to be deployed, just didn't have revenue sources. So yeah, that the RMA is a great organization. It works under the auspices of the county, of course, with direction from the MPO on the long-term planning.
Do you think that a lot of your success was tied to the fact that you had an existing RMA that the money could be directly tied to, as far as getting that legislation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think whenever I would get any kind of questions from some of my colleagues, what they always expect is, so how can this be leveraged into my county, and do I want it or not? And I know our friends in Houston, for example, weren't enamored with being having that, but they're in a different situation. Toll revenues in the state in Houston are or at least there are toll revenues in Houston. There are none here. They by virtue of formula, Houston gets a significant amount of the dollars that are allocated on an annual basis by the state. San Antonio, Bear County, our region typically gets somewhere between 9 and 9.5%. Houston is way ahead of that. So I mean, everybody has revenue shortfalls, but Houston and others were not looking to have that $10 assessment easily made available within their jurisdictions. And so when we built if you will, built the walls around, ours that really focused it on San Antonio and our existing RMA, it made it a little bit more palatable. Unfortunately, it didn't, it didn't come to fruition. And but I do believe that we're probably going to be trying again this time around.
Okay. And I think there are, I mean, is it, I want to say there's about 10 counties that have that ability right now to do that. Is that accurate or is it?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so. I think 10 is the number. However, I don't want to, you know, I believe Bear County is the largest
Right.
county that has it available. The rest of them are, for the most part, rural.
Right. And when in bills that have tried to essentially be all inclusive, right, saying that it allows any county to do this, those are the ones that seem to have a lot more trouble getting through. Whereas if it's more of kind of a local bill that's got the local support.
Exactly. I mean, and I think that, and that's important. I mean, that's important for everyone to be able to say whether, if they'll support something or not, if it doesn't affect them. I think what the secondary question typically is, but could somebody get very innovative and then force it on us here in our county when we really don't want it?
Right.
And, and of course, to answer that question, although I think philosophically, if the county has a referendum and they voted in, then, then it's really the will of the public as opposed to the will of the legislators. And maybe there ought to be some consideration for it. I mean, if the public is voting it in, but
Right.
that's
Well,
always an argument.
yeah. And one of the things that we've talked about and we've asked for just to start have conversations, and it's something that's being looked at, quite frankly, for property tax issues is the sales tax, right? We're still capped. And we know that that can be, a regressive tax for folks. And it's hard, that sometimes the sales tax can be challenging, especially for folks on fixed incomes. But, just again, allowing that ability for a locality to be able to increase their taxes. Right now, you can't even do it, even if you wanted to. And so we've looked at that again to help, kind of relaunch economic development. Again, it's that return on investment conversation. Right. So, but it's so interesting because last session was when we really started talking about it, and it was essentially dead on arrival. But then all of a sudden, the property tax conversation started spinning into the sales tax cap relief bucket, and so I do wonder if you always kind of say, okay, this is what's politically viable, but you always have to be ready because you never know when a conversation is going to start spiraling and things can change.
No doubt. Which kind of brings me back to the very first, one of the first comments that I made. Things change, literally once it's on the floor. I mean, in a moment's notice, and you've got to be able to have access to your legislators to make sure that while we probably are, aware, oftentimes, I mean, so many bills, I mean, thousands of bills come across the onto the floor every session. To be a subject matter expert in all of them is virtually impossible. So it's important. And I know that the vast majority, if not all of us, rely on folks, whether it's individual constituencies or organizations that we have confidence in, to kind of give us their point of view right at the last moment.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of, starting with that and kind of, I don't know how close to the end we are, but that's certainly, I think, a thought that I want to leave with you. To make sure that you know who your reps are, and not only those that will listen to you with an open mind and open ears, but even the ones that may be a bit of a problem from philosophical, because they need to kind of understand. They can vote no, but make sure they understand what they're voting no on, and I think that helps to manage some of their attempts to sabotage by virtue of putting in amendments that will kill a deal. So it's always good to have to be informed. And I know you guys do a good job of it. Encourage you to keep on doing it.
Well, yeah, and I always say we don't want to be siloed, even with other issues, right? That are kind of creeping up in the session. We know transportation's not the only thing, and so it's good for us to kind of have that big view of everything. I did want to talk about safety. So that's another big issue related to transportation. And I know Representative Celia Israel introduced, I think it was, I don't know if it's this session or not, but I know it's House Bill 427, I think I have in my head. But it has to do with Okay, so all different issues related to safety, right? So pedestrian safety, which I know you also have legislation in for that, as well as reducing the speed limits in residential urban areas. That's huge for a lot of areas in the Houston region where it just makes it easier if there's state legislation that's saying this.
Right.
Because then there does, it has all the sign. People don't think about it, but it's all the signage and all the requirements and all of that creates a lot of challenges for our municipalities. So, and it's the difference between, 10 miles on a speed limit is the difference between a fatality and an injury. So, can you share from your, vantage point, your support of these types of legislation? You want to talk about your bill
Yeah,
as well?
absolutely. Well, I think across the board, I mean, supporting issues that increase the amount of safety on our streets, whether it's on our highways or in arterials or feeders or all of the streets that we have, and here in San Antonio, we have the capacity to suggest a 20-mile an hour speed zone, but 30 miles an hour is it, even in a residential zone, and that's to your point, the difference between an injury and a fatality. The issue really becomes enforceability for cities, for municipalities. You can put 20 miles an hour out there. You got to put a different kind of colored sign and the like. You can put it out there, but you can't enforce it. And that becomes a problem across the board. If you can't enforce if you can't enforce a rule, then it kind of puts you behind the eight ball. So I'm real supportive of those kinds of issues. We've got a bill, really that talks about an extension of things that are already happening with certain categories of folks on the street, emergency vehicles and the like. I mean, come on, it just becomes, it just makes sense. If you see the lights, slow down, move over. And those are the kinds of safety initiatives that I think we should make universal. At the end of the day, many of those folks that are out there driving, in a less than safe environment, typically are not necessarily paying attention to what they're doing. More than likely, or on a telephone conversation. By the way, I'm on a telephone conversation in my car, and I'm parked in the parking lot. Even
Just
if
to
it was
clarify, that's good.
because the simple distraction, and when you increase the distraction at 60 or 70 or even 80 miles an hour, you're literally asking for disaster. So we're submitting a bill as well, to make those safety considerations law and enforceable.
Yeah, great. No, I know we've got a lot of folks on the call that are, safety is paramount. And I'm not sure if Freddie Warner's on with Memorial Hermann Hospital System, but it is the hospitals too that are asking for a lot of these measures. And so it's not just the transportation industry that's looking at the seriousness of safety. So we appreciate
Right.
your support and your leadership on that.
Not at all.
I want to move to kind of the look of the session. And it's like every day there's a little bit more that trickles out maybe about what it might look like. Certainly each chamber is working in their own way. One of the things that's been mentioned is that there won't be as many bills filed. Some say no, there will be just as many. I'm curious kind of what you're thinking. If some people said choose wisely, don't put a lot in. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, I do have some very specific thoughts on that, because initially when it was, well, let me just back up. Last session, I came in after the filing deadline,
Okay.
and I recognized that that I still had some bills that the first thing we did was we took a look at existing bills to find out if there were any that we wanted to either you know uh, uh, you know joint author, co-author, or whatever, and kind of hop onto those. And we
Right.
were able to capture initiatives that were important to us and sign on to them. Yet there were a couple, like the gas tax bill was not there, and there were a handful of other things that we wanted to make sure happened. And when I was out on the campaign trail, folks were telling me that these were important issues to them. But unfortunately, we get there and it's after the filing date. So I asked for permission of the speaker, and he gave it to me for me to ask the members, where I had to get 75% of them to agree for them to
Okay.
waive the rules so I could submit bills. So I do believe that whenever we as legislators are questioned or challenged by our constituencies to file certain bills, we should be given the opportunity to do that without limit. We also recognize that there are certain choke points within the process. If 8 to 10,000 bills get submitted, recognizing that the vast majority of them are not going to make the floor, they're not going to get out of calendar. They're not. I mean, they're just not going to happen. But we've got to be able to give all the legislators an opportunity to file them and give them a fighting chance. So I don't believe that we should restrict those numbers. I think naturally they're going to get restricted, and I would like to see us change the House rules that allow, or maybe even changes the rules permanently. Today, if I want to go see who is filing a bill that is similar to mine, I
Right.
I'm not allowed to do that. Now I can ask around, I can look at things that are being published and the like, but there's no systemic way of knowing what the details are that the budget
Mm.
the that the legislative board is looking at bills that they're creating. Ledge Council. There's no way of me knowing that. I can't go to them and say, "Can you tell me, are there 3 or 4? How many bills are there similar to this one?" So I can kind of coalesce them together, and that's not allowable. They kind of go like, you can go out and find your own, use your own means to go find those things out. And I think it would be an advantage to us as legislators to be able to do that. I haven't heard the argument of why we don't allow that to happen, but I'd like to see that happening, going forward, where
Interesting.
we can talk to each other about the
Right.
stuff that's going on. And it would reduce the number of bills. Plus, it would give, I think, support to those bills that there's a lot of unity on.
Right.
Allow us to kind of jointly put our names behind something, and I think it would make I think it would help democracy, quite honestly.
No, I agree. I mean, last session we worked with Mondo Martinez to introduce legislation related to electric vehicles, right? And then Representative Ken King, but had his. But initially, I kept asking. I said, is anybody else talking about this? Because everyone agreed that something had to be done, but nothing had been put on paper to start a conversation, and there wasn't. And then all of a sudden, when Mondo Martinez's bill got filed, then all of it, we noticed, okay, Ken King, and then a couple, I think there were maybe one or two others. So I hear you in that. It would have been helpful to have some sense of a conversation beforehand. So I can see both sides of that, but I think ultimately it probably does reduce the amount of bills that would get filed. Um, Speaking of which, I know we had a conversation, I think it was last week, with House Transportation Chairman Terry Canales, who was talking about all of these little pieces of things. And his view was that, um, a large kind of omnibus bill was the best solution, right? To include everything. I can see, again, pros and cons on both sides, but that's an example where, he's working kind of on one master piece of legislation, and a lot of others are going to be doing,
Yeah.
just individual bills filed for pieces of it. And then, of course, we don't know what happens with a new speaker of the House and how that shifts the chairmanships and the committees and all that. And I think everyone's just kind of waiting to see whether or not that's going to be a longer process or a shorter process. And I didn't know if you had a sense for kind of the personality that the House will kind of take on as a result of, whom we think will be the presumptive
Sure.
speaker.
Well,
Feeling.
yeah, and I think we all recognize that Representative Phelan is, going to be it more than likely. I mean, I guess uh, short of some catastrophic
Right.
event, um, like he says, hell, I could get run over this evening riding my bike. Let's hope that doesn't happen. And I think it's going to be what I'm being told and reassured, and I've had several conversations with Dade, is that he wants to be open. He says, when people are asking me what's my agenda, I tell them I don't have an agenda as speaker. I have a personal agenda, an agenda that my constituents have really underscored that I need to follow. But I don't have a agenda as speaker. I want to hear from you. What is your agenda within your community? How can I help? Make sure that you can implement that agenda if it's good for Texas, and I think if that spirit continues, then appointments will be made. I know that we were told what the process was going to be for committee appointments, and I'm going to be given an opportunity, when the session opens, to submit for committee appointments. I'm certainly going to ask for transportation, and I'm going to ask for Veterans Affairs. I was on Veterans Affairs last time, and I just believe that, uh, you know, I guess I'll let others make the argument whether I have a good handle on the issues around transportation. But I would argue that out of the 150 of us, more than likely, I probably have the most water under my bridge when it comes to understanding and recognizing the funding structures and the like. So I hope I can get on transportation and be an active leader in moving our policies forward. We've got some challenges. There are some things that have been edicted, even at the over the course of the last few sessions, from the governor's office and others, that have not been necessarily in agreement with my positions. And I'm talking about things like just a complete, non-responsive approach to considering toll roads in areas where they may be useful, not being able to commingle House Bill, I mean, I'm sorry, Proposition 1 and $7 with toll funding that's made available. I mean, those are issues that are undermining, I think, the effective ability of MPOs to go out and pull together rare dollars, I mean, scarce dollars that are available, and use them in the best effective way for their community. And I think we have some philosophical concerns. I have philosophical concerns with the direction, and of course, I can't change those things, but I think what I can do is bring that level of understanding, at the committee level. And if there is a strong, with the strength of leadership in those committees, we can make, I think, the point into the Senate, as well as the governor's office, and hopefully make some inroads into those philosophical perspectives on how we use our tax dollars wisely.
Right. Yeah. No. And thank you for bringing up the tolling issue, because it's one that we was so kind of fired up, right, in past sessions, and still is a big issue. I think it's quieted a bit. I think that my sense is that the commission, the Textile Commission, is looking more favorably on if a locality comes to them with a need for the tolling, and it's something that the locals all agree on. It seems they're a bit more forgiving, right? But when you're talking about kind of just policy wise, Prop 1, Prop 7, right, it really restricts MPOs and others when they're trying to piece together these projects. It's really limiting, because then you're thinking, well, if it touches a toll road, or if it leads to a toll road, what are I know there was a lot of confusion as to what are some of the restrictions. So we appreciate your support. And, our big thing is you just have to keep all the tools in the toolbox, and nothing should be overused one way or another. I wanted to talk a little bit more about public transportation and transit. I know we talk a lot about highways. I think there's still a strong desire to find, from the state, a more dedicated funding stream for public transportation, not taking away money from the highway fund. But as we're looking at new revenue ideas, does it make sense to take a percentage to the highway fund and then also a percentage to some type of a transit fund? Whether it's, we've got the Gulf Coast Rail District that was created but doesn't have funding, things like that, where even just the smallest boost would be helpful to local governments. I think people think of transit as a very urban issue, but it's not. It is also a very rural issue for seniors. So it also might be one of those things where, again, it's a local bill that has more success than something statewide, but there's got to be a way to start trickling some money, especially new revenue that's coming in, towards transit. So just your thoughts on that.
Well, I'll keep it at a real high level, but I mean, transit is such a multifaceted, encompassing dialogue, right? I mean, whether it's rail, urban or suburban, rural, it's incredibly important that we kind of understand what all the pieces are. Uh, uh, Creating funding for that, honestly, I don't know that I haven't given it a whole lot of thought, other than I certainly support the creation of any kind of a revenue stream that's dedicated to transit in general, particularly leading edge transit initiatives that we're going to be looking at going forward. And I wouldn't limit it to to partnering even with technology organizations that are going to help in that transit world. We're going to have to make some changes. The autonomous vehicle uh, phenomenon is becoming reality. I mean, we're all getting cars now that have some sort of a little buzzing system when you're veering off to the left or the right. So going, oh, so that's what that's all about. Well, eventually that's gonna be a an incredible opportunity for us to create a safer environment. Autonomous cars, perhaps. Well, that's going to require significant investment in how we and really investment in technological design of highways and how we put out the ability to be able to get that signaling back and forth from the cars to the lanes to each other, and we should be innovative in that way. I'm just kind of spitballing a little bit there, but innovation is not I think innovation. Most people immediately lose the innovation notion, thinking, "Hey, listen, all we had to do is build more roads and to deal with more cars," and that is not at all part of the solution. It really is deploying some level of technology, or I would say a significant level of technology, to help us manage our traffic going forward. I mean, even to the point of just today we have a great you know uh, system. TxDOT has a system to let people know when a senior, one of my fellow seniors, is lost, or perhaps Amber Alerts and the like. That should be a more real time system notification that allows you to know to redirect your route, perhaps, and even give you a suggestion of routes and times that you might be able to drive around congestion. Whether and of course that's more of of an urban issue, but uh, we've got to be able to be innovative enough to know that and smart enough to be able to set some money aside to be able to fund those kinds of initiatives.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a very complex issue. I mean, it is, but technology will continue to make it more complicated,
Uh,
easier in some ways, but more complicated in others. Um, Before we close, I did want to. We spent again vast majority transportation. I know transportation is one of your top passionate issues, but I know there are other things that are priority for you. And so I just wanted to so we can get a sense too if there's other major initiatives that you're really passionate about going into the session that you would like to share with us.
well, yeah, as a matter of fact, you're right. I mean, transportation, education. I mean, I came from that environment, right? I was on the school
Right.
board for many years, so I mean, I have an understanding, of the funding issues and curriculum concerns in education. So, that and transportation simply by virtue of my time on city council and the NPO. But there are other things that have really surfaced, and it isn't simply because of the COVID environment, but it's medical services being made readily available, accessible
Mhm.
to everyone. I don't know, certainly not here to talk about my personal health condition, but in September, mid September, I was enjoying the upcoming weekend. I knew that not long afterwards the holidays would hit, then the legislative session. So I was out at my lake property working on my cabin, which I do a lot of, and got home, wasn't feeling too good, and laid down to watch a little bit of TV. And before you knew it, I had this really terrible heartburn situation that I typically don't have. And by the following morning, on Sunday morning, it was unbearable. My wife was going like, well, maybe it's a COVID issue, right? So she
Right.
called a friend of ours, a doctor that runs the COVID center at the UT Health, and gave her the symptoms. She says, take him to the hospital right away, and I'll have somebody waiting. I showed up. Lo and behold, I was having a heart attack,
Wow.
and I wound up having a triple bypass. And as an individual that understands that he has a history, right? I mean, I've got a bunch of uncles, a handful of relatives that have suffered heart attacks, knowing that
Mhm.
cholesterol and blood pressure and all that stuff is in my family. I keep a pretty good track of it. But you know what? It got away from me. I did not realize I was having a heart attack until I was on the stretcher and they were talking all these cardio terms. So it became real obvious to me that there's a lot of us out there that aren't paying close attention to the signs of our body telling us, hey, you need to go get checked. And it's simply because right now, because of COVID, people don't want to go get in the middle of a medical scenario simply because they're concerned about maybe getting infected by COVID. But that's creating a significant problem, because by the time more folks are having to go to emergency because they've let their condition get worse and haven't gone out and gotten the checks. I can tell you that many of the doctors that I spoke with whenever I was in the hospital were talking about the emergency room and urgent care calls were dropping in volume, but increasing in severity. In other words, that means not the people weren't coming, and when they were in a bad position already because they let it go so long. So in doing some of that research, I mean, making sure that folks at home, all of it, that everyone should have, especially those that are under some sort of doctor care, have a blood pressure cuff in their house, some way of checking their glucose levels. And
Right.
many don't, especially at the low income family structures, simply because they can't afford it. Well, what we should do is be able to have a state funded medical support to be able to provide those types of tools. In today's environment, we keep on talking about telemedicine. I don't know if anybody on the call has been on a telemedicine call, but if
Yeah.
you don't have a pressure cup at home, you got a problem. If you don't know your glucose levels to be able to tell that doctor, you're not going to get the in-depth telemedicine support that you need, because you can't give them all the
Yeah.
data. So I think as we move forward, some of the lessons learned from the COVID scenario is that we've got to have more medical diagnostics for ourselves, and we need to be in a position to be able to communicate that to our doctors so that we can be talking to our family physicians, not emergency care facilities. It will drop down the cost of medical care and give a better, healthy environment for our public. So, it's always been important.
Right.
But because of my little September adventure,
Yeah.
it became one of those, gosh, I really get it now. So I'm working really hard to make sure that, we can have that level of dialogue, this coming session.
No, thank you. And thank you for sharing that. And that's a very personal approach to the situation. And so we're very grateful that you have come out on the other side. And that's not insignificant. So,
No, not at all.
So, and kudos to you for, perhaps you felt as if you would let it go a little bit longer than you should have, but you at least took notice, pretty quickly and got
I
to
give
it.
all the credit to my wife.
Well, yes, that is, well, and I think too, with COVID, it's not even just the not wanting to go and be in the doctor's offices. It is that we just feel that if something this massive is going on right now, it's almost as if we assume that other things are on pause, right? I've had a lot of people say, oh, all the regular bad stuff can still happen,
It's still
even though
happening,
we're in the
yeah.
middle of a pandemic. And so, none of that stuff stops. None of that care of our health,
Right.
should stop. So thank you for that. And I hope that, everybody on the call takes something from that story in their own lives. So, so appreciate your time today. We look forward to more conversations. There was a video we were going to play in the beginning, but because of the errors and not knowing who was coming in, we were late. So I'm going to send that to your team so you can just take a quick look at it. It's a video that we've prepared, spotlighting transportation. And we hope everybody joins us on Thursday with Senator Larry Taylor. And thank you again, Representative. We look forward to future conversations with you. And we will stay close to the transportation issues and any way we can be supportive. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm off to my next meeting.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everybody. We hope that you have a great day, and we hope to see you on Thursday.
Thank you, first of all, to TAG for all that you're doing, and thank you for thinking about those families who need.
I hope to see y'all soon. I appreciate your work, your advocacy, not just during the session, but post-session.
You're innovators, visionaries, and I really appreciate that.
Appreciate the friendships that I've had with the transportation community.
Thank y'all for putting these on. It's just a really great idea, and thank you to everyone that's watching.
Definitely thank you to TAG for keeping us connected, continuing to keep us connected even in these unprecedented times.
We're all in this together. We will come out of this together. We will definitely be stronger together.